On the stage right now, we're going to continue with former Maryland Congressman John Delaney, who announced his candidacy for the presidency 20 months ago. Let's go back to the audience. I want to bring in Bhavesh Shah. He's a digital strategist from California. Bhavesh.
Good evening. Turning the focus to our current president, my question for you is, in your opinion, what is the single most, what's the single most damaging long-term consequence of the Trump presidency?
It's a long list. It's a long list. So for the American people, what he's done to degrade the standards in our society, the fear-mongering, his notion that your enemy is your fellow American, I think that is so corrosive and so damaging. Right? As I said, I think what a president should do is be bringing us together, appealing to, as Lincoln said, our better angels, lifting us up, right? Telling the American people that we can do better, but we have to do better together. Not as Democrats, not as Republicans, but as Americans. And I think he's a deeply divisive president who fear-mongers, and his approach is not who we are as the American people. It's not who we are. But I also think what he's done internationally, right? One of the great assets of this amazing country is the alliances that we've developed since World War II. We've worked so hard for 70 years to work with our allies, right, on a value-based approach to building a world order for peace and security. And it has been in the best interest and the self-interest and the national interest of the American people. He has a very narrow transactional view of the world. He doesn't value our allies. He doesn't value the institutions that we've worked so hard to build. He doesn't believe in a values-based approach, right? Which is why I believe he lacks a moral compass. So that moral compass, or that lack of a moral compass, animates itself in terms of how he divides the American people, but also in terms of what he's doing to our allies and these institutions that we've worked so hard to build. You know, NATO, things like the Paris Accord that President Obama worked so hard on. You know, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which I was a big supporter of. So, you know, it's a long list of grievances that I have with him as our president, but I think it's this fundamental lack of a moral compass. I think that will be the biggest lasting damage.
On the topic of foreign affairs, let me bring in Alexandra Barrienta. She's a tech recruiter who lives in the Austin area. Alexandra?
Hi. My question is, all the national security agencies are in agreement that the U.S. was targeted by the Russians seeking to shake up the 2016 election. So what is your plan for defending the United States against another attack like that?
It's a great question. You're right. All 17 national security agencies in the United States of America, all 17 of them, are in unanimous agreement that Russia intentionally interfered in our elections. So I believe them over Putin. So I'll start with that. So our elections are in many ways the most sacred thing in our democracy. So we need to be hardening our election systems in this country to make sure they're safe from foreign interference. And this president hasn't done enough in that, and I will. But I also think you have to deal with Russia, and they have to understand that they can't do this, right? So that would be my approach, right? I wouldn't believe Vladimir Putin just because he said he didn't do it, which is what the current president is doing. I would believe our intelligence agencies. I would make it clear to Russia that we have a zero-tolerance policy as it relates to them interfering in our election. But I would also make sure that our systems are hardened, right? That they're hardened against cyber attacks generally, but against this attack specifically, because it gets to the core functioning of our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Congressman, you talked earlier about going out and meeting voters and meeting a lot of them who have had to deal with addiction, and especially with the opioid crisis. I want to introduce you to Lynette Pogue. She's an accountant here in Austin. Lynette?
Hi. As a mother of a recovering addict, my family and I would want to know, what you would do to expand the national conversation regarding this opioid crisis with practical steps to eliminate or at least decrease this epidemic.
Thank you for the question. It sounds like you've had to deal with a very difficult situation. And I can't tell you how many times I've had questions like this, right? This is just ravaging our country. About 200 people die a day from addictions, over 100 from opioids. It's a public health crisis. It's a public health crisis. And we have to be confronting it as a public health crisis, right? So that's really what we have to do. We have to be confronting it as a public health crisis. We have to be confronting it as a mental health crisis. I think a president's voice should be present in this conversation, but I also think a president has to get some things done, right? There are real programs that work. When I travel around this country and I go to communities, I see nonprofits on the ground that are actually making a difference. So there are people who are fighting this on the front lines. Right? Police officers, when you talk to members of our terrific law enforcement community, and you talk to them about how their job has changed, and across an evening, 80% of the things they're called in on are overdoses. Right? So it's consuming so many communities. Part of it is because of all the economic despair we have in this country. Huge parts of our country have been left behind economically. 50% of the American people can't afford a $500 expense. Right? Those are the conditions that breed addiction. We haven't treated mental health on parity with physical health. That's part of the problem. We haven't. If I were to ask people in this room, which I won't, to put up your hands if you've had a member of your immediate family that has a mental health issue, I bet every hand would go up. So this is a huge crisis, 40 million Americans, as I said. So we have to address it as a mental health issue, as a public health issue. We have to deal with the pharmaceutical companies, right, that have... Remember how I said to the other gentleman, I think it was Warren, how I talked about how student debt is not dischargeable in bankruptcy? Well, Purdue Pharmaceuticals, there was stories last week how they were going to file for bankruptcy to avoid the liability associated with this. Just put it in contrast kind of how our laws are set up in this country. But, it's tearing Americans. It's going to create a huge foster care crisis in this country. It's just tearing our country apart. We have to put resources behind it. We got to be backing things that work. And we have to treat it as the public health and the mental health crisis that it really is. And we have to do things to improve the economic conditions in communities that create the environment for this kind of stuff to happen. Because it is a scar on our country right now, what's happening. Thank you.
God bless you, Lynette. Thanks for your courage talking about this today. I want to bring in Al Carroll. He's a recruiter in the technology industry from Indiana. Al?
I will be blessed to welcome a second little one in June. I'm also blessed to work for a company that allows me 6 weeks of paid paternity leave. I was the first male at my company to take advantage of the policy, and it was amazing. What plans, if any, do you have to ensure paid parental leave is a right all Americans have access to moving forward?
Great question. Congratulations on your second on the way, and God bless you. My wife and I have 4 amazing daughters, so I know the feeling and the excitement you're feeling right now. And this is really important, right? I think it's a basic right, and we should have paid parental leave policies in this country. And there's a bunch of legislation, including ones that I've supported in the Congress, that effectively create an insurance fund to allow it to happen. So everyone contributes a very, very small amount. Part of their paycheck, we create a national insurance fund, and we allow people to access it. So in my company, I started 2 businesses prior to running for Congress, and I took them public. They were on the New York Stock Exchange. And one of the things I was always really proud of is the benefits that I provided to my employees. It was good for them, but it was also good for the bottom line. And I think people need to realize that not only are these policies good for families, and they're good for people, they're also good for our economy. Right? These are smart economic policies. Right? These allow people to be more engaged, have better work-life balance. And so I think it's an incredibly important policy, and I plan to advocate for national policy so that everyone has the benefits that your company gives you, and it's good that they're doing that.